So welcome to Next Economy Conversations. If you're meeting us for the first time, welcome. The Center for Social Innovation sorry, one sec, type glitch. The Center for Social Innovation is a community co-working space and launchpad for entrepreneurs, organizations, and companies that are changing the world by putting people and planet first. In these times, we are a vibrant online community, and we continue to offer daily opportunities for our members to virtually gather, learn, and collaborate together, including community events, education programs, and acceleration programs. The Center for Social Innovation Institute, our affiliate charity and event partner, helps Canadians use social innovation to get to the root causes of systems-level problems. As we said, this event series is called Next Economy Conversations, where you will hear from incredible leaders who are helping to make the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic one that creates positive change and that builds the next economy, one that is sustainable, equitable, and prosperous for all. Each month, we invite a new guest to hear about their personal journeys, successes, and visions for the future. At CSI, we always start our events with an acknowledgement of the land, even when we're hosting virtual events. So today we want to acknowledge that for those of us who are in Toronto, we're gathering on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, the Seneca, and the Mississauga of the Credit First Nations. As we think and talk about social innovation, we are sometimes discussing a shared vision for a sustainable and just future. However, it's critical that we also reflect on the past and the present to consider how we can strive towards more inclusive, resilient communities that incorporate and respect many different ways of knowing and being. And as we have moved our work and our lives into the digital realm, this also means considering how patterns of inequality can transcend into these spaces. So on that note, we want to share this quote from Alexander Dirksen on decolonizing digital spaces. Meaningful change begins with recognition of technological innovation as a fundamentally human endeavor. Behind the sleek glass and metal enclosures of our lithium-charged lifelines are people, with each line of code carrying with it all the complexities of human existence. Technology is not a neutral force, nor are digital spaces safe spaces for all, instead mirroring, replicating, and at times exacerbating the real and pressing realities faced by Indigenous peoples and other marginalized communities in physical spaces. A social justice lens must therefore be applied to all that we discuss, design, and develop in the digital realm. So we encourage you to consider what it might look like in your own work to apply a social justice lens, whether you're also hosting emergent conversations or if you're participating in them and shaping them. And you can also check out this awesome resource called Native Land to learn about the land that you're on. And without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce our guest for this month, Jay-Ann Gilfoy, who is the CEO of Vancity Community Investment Bank, which is a values-driven bank and a national subsidiary of Vancouver City Savings Credit Union, commonly known as Vancity. A visionary leader with more than 20 years of experience as a senior executive, Jayan is focused on bringing to life VCIB's bold mission and vision of financing a sustainable tomorrow and a unique model of partnering exclusively with organizations driving positive social and environmental change in their communities. Under Jayan's tenure, VCIB has honed its purpose while expanding its scope and capacity to drive results in the critical areas of affordability and clean energy, starting in Ontario. Among her achievements is leading VCIB to become the first bank in Canada to acquire an impact investment firm, CoPower, a leading provider of clean energy financing and investments. Jayan will be in conversation today with our CEO at the Center for Social Innovation, Tonya Surman. Tonya is fueled by her belief in the power of collaboration and belonging. She knows that putting the right people in a room is only the first step in creating real change. We also need to build a culture where everyone knows that they have value and a voice to radically redesign our futures. She did this with the Center for Social Innovation, which reinvented the workplace by collecting social purpose organizations under one roof. And that's what she's doing with CSI's affiliate charity, the Center for Social Innovation Institute and Social Innovation Canada, unlocking the social innovation community to get at the root causes of problems. She knows that building relationships between people is the foundation for a better world, and that it's also a heck of a lot of fun. Tonya, I'm going to hand it over to you to share what we mean by the next economy and get the conversation started.
Zoya, thank you so much. You're so gracious, and I always get a little smirk every time I hear the intro, so thank you so much. I'm delighted to have you here with us, Jay-Ann. It's wonderful to have allies like you be able to join us in these conversations. So let me tell you a little bit about what we mean when we say the next economy. When you Google the next economy or the new economy, you get different definitions, and many mostly in technology and innovation. To me, it refers to a shift from an economy that has often and historically and largely been founded on exploitation and extraction. Instead, that the old economy refers to, sorry, I'm reading somebody else's thing. I'm just going to tell you what I really think. Basically,
okay.
old stuff is wrong.
The old stuff is wrong. Got it.
It's not working. Deregulation, privatization, globalization, the supremacy of private sector players. We're seeing that this profit motivation has got to stop. We're looking finally at integrating new ideas, looking at regenerative economies, circular economy, equitable economies, a people and planet focused economy. And this question of how do we get our economic system to serve us instead of serving itself. And so when we start to look at this field of the next economy, Jayan, you were one of the first people that I wanted to talk to, because look, banking, right? Banking. It's the kind of infrastructure that we talk about as holding so much of this back. And I know that with your parent organization, Vancity Vancity Credit Union, and now with VCIB, 100% dedicated to community. The ideas of the next economy are in your bones. It's what you guys are doing. So I'm really, really excited about this conversation today, and I hope that we can dig into a whole bunch of the practical things that you're doing to shift the economy to be able to put people and planet first. So, but before I get into all of those things, there's a couple things that I need to kind of acknowledge. The first thing is that VCIB is CSI's mortgage holder. So you're my banker. I owe you guys a lot of money. You also have been an incredible supporter of our programs, supported our Community Resilience Fund, our Earth Tech program, and have sponsored many of the events. And we really consider VCIB to be a true partner in our day-to-day work every single day. And we see, you know, for those of you listening, it was Jayan who, when the global pandemic hit, our bank called us to make sure that we were okay. And that is real partnership. And I just want to call out how incredibly valuable that support has been as CSI has muddled through what has been a really difficult process. I've also wanted to speak to you, Jayan, because you are an incredible leader, an incredible woman who has been doing amazing work. And I want to hear a little bit more about how you're doing during these days of COVID, and then give us a little bit of a background into why VCIB, why VCIB for you.
Yeah, thanks, Tonya. So I appreciate all that support. I know, I think it was like week 2 of this, I reached out to Tonya and said, let's get together for a chat, because I don't know how you're feeling, but I'm feeling like this is going to be the world is ending, right? So first of all, I want to acknowledge that I'm calling in from Surrey, British Columbia, which is on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, and in particular, the Semiahmoo First Nations. And so they've been stewards of this land, and I'm very grateful to live, work, and play here. While I have been in pandemic, prior to that, I was traveling between here and Toronto regularly. And the other day I took out my little luggage and went, I want to go back. I want to go back. So hopefully at some point later this year or early into 2022, we'll get out of this. So, what drives me, I guess the first thing I think about is, my first career was in human resources. And so I was a very early kind of advocate for diversity and inclusion. It sort of started way back when, after I graduated from university, and really wanted to make sure that there was a lot of effort in organizations around people. And in those years, late 80s, early 90s, HR was just emerging as a place for employees to have a voice, right, in terms of what the organization was doing. So I think at this stage of my career, I think my reason to be on this earth is to help make others successful. And so whether that's helping to make organizations like yours successful, or whether that's helping to make people who work with me successful, I think that's kind of what my reason to be on this earth is. And so I think that's the context for what drives me to kind of do the things that I do. And then I've just been very fortunate to join Vancity, coming from another credit union. So I had some cooperative experience, and then coming to Vancity and working with an amazing visionary of Tamara Vrooman, who really, had a vision to kind of take the world of finance, turn it upside down, make sure it's focusing on the real economy, which is now the next economy, right? And out ahead of that, and really bought into that. I'm like, okay, finally, I'm somewhere where my values and my work can connect. And then having the opportunity to take a vision like that and actually bring it to practice, as you say, in Ontario, it's been the job of a dream job of a lifetime, right? To be able to hear stories like yours and all those other organizations that we've been able to help, and really addressing like big issues, because you can't have a healthy economy without people having homes, without people having security, without people having safety, without people having community. You can't, and money, to your point, traditionally hasn't been flowing there. So, I see some hope for sure in terms of the movement towards purpose-driven organizations and the movement towards banks and other financial institutions finally recognizing that the shareholders who are driving the change and the customers are demanding it to be different. But I think we've been out in front of that. And so we're still, scrambling to make sure that we're getting what we need to do out into the places that it needs to go.
And it's such important work. And tell me a little bit more about the scope of work for VCIB.
Mm-hmm. So VCIB is a commercial bank. So it's, we don't do retail banking like other financial institutions, if you're familiar with the structure of the bank. And then we've really been focusing on vision of financing a sustainable tomorrow. And so, when we arrived in Ontario, we kind of, called all our friends and organizations who knew Vancity from, the days that we've been at, conferences in the past, or speaking, or involved in government policy. And then quickly realized as we came into Ontario that the affordability issue was one of the biggest ones that was facing the GTA. And I think even with the pandemic, it's even more. We can talk about that in a bit. And so we really honed in on, that we had some deep experience in Vancity, many years of doing affordable housing projects, because Vancouver obviously is one of the most expensive cities to live in the world. So we took that and we brought it to Ontario, and always knowing that we wanted to expand that, but kind of starting with what we knew. And then now we have more capability. So we have capability of doing financial banking, financial services, lending to businesses, purpose-driven organizations, social enterprises, that whole space. And we've got the clean energy practice, as we talked about. So we think of the intersection between affordability, clean energy, and purpose-driven, kind of blends the environment and social justice things that we talk about, and that Zoya was talking about even at the beginning of this. She's delightful, by the way.
Yes, I know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
gives me lots of hope.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Next generation, we're not going to let you down. We're doing our best, I swear.
Yeah.
One of the words I don't hear you using, and I'm interested, is I don't hear you using the word social finance or impact investing. And, I'm really struggling. I mean, I've been in this field for 30 years, and I'm not even sure I understand the difference between all these. Like, do you have any thoughts or insight on like the range or scope of the kind of?
I think that's one of the challenges that we face. And I think you and I have had this conversation many times before. There's kind of, as you talk about, there's two worlds. There's the world of leaders like you, the trailblazers, the ones who come from deep knowledge of, if we're going to make people successful, we've got to help on a systems level, right? The social impact orientation. Let's start with a need in a community and build an enterprise around that, right? And then you've got the private sector, economy that's all about let's make money, and then let's figure out, at some point in our making money, maybe we should do something good for the world. And so you've got those two kind of things happening. So I think social finance and impact investing is meant to kind of, bring those two worlds together a little bit more so that you can put the money, whether you're, instead of lending money just to a commercial building, as an example, you can now use the money and use the influence of having the money to influence that commercial builder to build it in a way that's sustainable, because we all know that that the built environment is a huge contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, right? So I think that's where social finance fits, right? Is making sure the money is going to those things that have both a profit and a purpose outcome in terms of that. Impact investing, I think, starts at, let's say, it started from, people wanting to put their money to good, right? And so it started in a natural way of, I'm not sure that these businesses that I have in my mutual fund, or these businesses that I have to invest directly, align with my values. So I want to look at how I can do that differently. So a whole kind of industry emerged around, let's find the businesses and the organizations that are doing the good things. Let's put our money there. And then it just sort of evolved as our generations have evolved, as our thinking has evolved, as our as a country, how we now look at those things, I think, is very different than it was 10 years ago. But impact investing is looking at, okay, the organization that I'm investing in needs to have things around planet and people, governance, outcomes, right? Do no harm kind of things. And so that whole movement is obviously starting to get a lot more traction, I think, particularly with people like Larry Fink at BlackRock starts to talk about the types of organizations that he's gonna invest in. So it's a good thing, right? But it's still kind of in transition.
I'm obsessed with Larry Fink. So what do you think? Do you think that this is like comments on his CEO letters? Like I'm loving it. But
yeah, me too.
I'm hearing critical people going, well, it's not enough, and they still invest in this, and they don't. Like, talk to me about what you think that must be like to shift that system. And also, Mark Carney too, right? Like, we've got
trillions of dollars of investment, needs to shift, right? Look, we all need to transition, right? So I think that's the, I think we, the space that we occupy at the bank is, we've sort of set some guidelines around what does impact mean for us, right? Like, what do we look at? What kind of businesses do we say yes to? What kind of businesses do we say no to? What kind of outcomes do we want to have happen as a result of our investment in this thing? And so we have investment guidelines for that. I think he's doing the same thing at a much more macro level, particularly as it relates to the stock market and publicly traded companies who have been kind of left off the hook around dealing with some of the issues that we talk about all the time for the quarterly earnings that you need to have in order for the shareholder to continue to invest in. So, but that's we need to transition out of a lot of old economy, as you talk about, and transition into new economy. But I think that movement is certainly happening. And, the conversations that I'm in, in CEO forums, from organizations that are manufacturers or technology providers or, retail providers are saying things like, what, we need to find a purpose. We need to find a purpose that fuels what we do, because our customers are telling us, we'll only buy from you if you can demonstrate you've got these things that you're going to be doing that's going to make the world better. We can't find the talent. Like, we know coming out of this that there's going to be a ton of people who've been just sticking with their employer because it's COVID. But when we come out of this, they're going to be like, hello, I want to come work for you or for you, right? Who've been doing all the right things through this time.
Yeah. Well, and to me, it's both so exciting, right? You see this incredible shift starting to happen. And of course, we've all been begging for it for decades. And there's been activists that have been pushing this and shareholder activism. And like, the amount of work that has gone into shifting that system in the last 30, 50 years is phenomenal.
Yeah.
I actually see it. Anyway, my fantasy is that I have Larry Fink on this little next economy conversation. I'm working it. Because think about what it took to get him in his own mind to be able to arrive at that place. And
Mhm.
apparently it was a bunch of activists who were pushing and prodding and anyway, but at the same time, you have this other side of the challenge that we face, which is, you get the impact investor like, oh yeah, I'm going to make a bunch of money doing good. Look at me.
Mhm.
And then I feel like there's a real kind of disconnect to the work on the other side, which is saying, yeah, but affordable housing may not make sense. And how do we afford to build homes for people in rent geared to income? And
Mhm.
what does community wealth look like? And when social enterprises, we know, will probably never break even. And yet they're good. They're
They are good.
they're essential.
Yeah.
And what do we do to finance the projects that actually don't at first glance start to make sense? And a little caveat, because I want to get into I really want to get into the community land trusts a little bit, because I know you guys played a role in the Parkdale community land trust, neighborhood land trust, and I'm blown away by this. And so I want to see if we can talk about this, but with an eye to, we're starting to really work around community wealth. And
Mhm.
when we're starting to look at community wealth, we're confronted with the issue of who owns the community assets. And we're also confronted with who owns homes and this financialization of housing, where we see those people like myself, admittedly, where I bought my house 22 years ago and it has increased in value, and now that's my retirement. This is this
Mhm.
financialization of housing, and how redistribution of wealth and racism and so many historical problems are now seeing the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. How do we use the power of finance? Easy question, Jayan.
Mhm. Wow.
Start to
Yeah.
use the power of finance to figure out this gap, this ownership gap in housing, and just talk to us about some of the stuff you've done, because I'm really quite delighted by it.
Yeah, I think if you look at the projects that we've helped to get moving, I think they span every from the sort of social housing problem, right? We've got people on the street, or we need to keep people off the street, i.e. the Parkdale Land Trust would be an organization that really wants to make sure that the people in their community get to stay living in their houses that are, deeply subsidized and not at market rent. So you got kind of that spectrum all the way through to, the ownership model of an options for home, which, is really about, they take a stake through a second mortgage, allow, somebody with, middle income type of life, start to acquire wealth and live buy into a house. So, and then we sort of finance kind of everything in between, right? We've had a few projects, whether it's a facility that has some sort of connection to a health issue, or a facility that's got a community connection to some sort of group, right? Sort of everything in between. So, so I think, it's a big question around what does the future hold on affordability and, making and the opportunity to gain wealth from land or from the place that you live, for sure. I think we are here to help those innovative thinkers like you and others bring their dreams to life, right? So there's all kinds of models that are being put out there on how to solve this problem for people. And we are the ones been behind trying to look at that creatively and objectively, still meeting the requirements that we have to, be a financial institution, but doing it in a way that, are you still there, Tonya? Because all of a sudden I went to just me. Did we lose her?
I think we might have lost her for a second, but hopefully she will join back in.
I was on such a good rant.
You can keep going. We're still
Yeah. So I think our job is to help the change makers figure this problem out, right? So that's where we think we can come in.
Yeah. Maybe I know that Tonya was keen to talk about this, so of course she will join in very soon. But I think we'd love to hear more about the Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust in West Toronto, because from our understanding, that was Ontario's first ever community land trust. And it was created to preserve land for affordable housing, as well as affordable working spaces for nonprofits and social enterprises and businesses run by local residents. So maybe we can start with a bit about what is a land trust and what was the journey like to make that happen?
Yeah, I think Josh is here, so that's good. But great story. I mean, the idea that you have that an organization can be formed, a not-for-profit can be formed to, acquire and retain land in perpetuity for the community is really what I think a land trust is all about, right? And if you look at the types of land trusts we have had in Canada, a lot of them have been around environmental lands. So lands around lakes and rivers and sensitive areas. So you create the land trust with the understanding that it can never be developed and it lives in perpetuity. And so the Parkdale Land Trust model is really to try and figure out how to, have affordability in perpetuity, right? So how do you take a part of the city that's gone through gentrification, and it's a great part of the city that's got an amazing sort of community attached to it. As I've gone out there pre-COVID and met some of the different organizations working there. But how do you make sure you're keeping the housing that was set up, as rooming houses for folks who would otherwise be out on the street? As an example, how do you make sure those types of buildings continue to exist so that people can have stability? So that's the whole part of the model of the Parkdale Land Trust. And so we've helped them figure out how to finance that as a not-for-profit, how to be able to buy land that is at a competitive market rate, basically. And so that's sort of what our activity is with them ongoing now. And then we've also, worked with them to broaden the conversation to other not-for-profits in Parkdale who also have land, to try to figure out like how do you maximize land as a not-for-profit. And Tonya, you're the perfect example of this, and you talk about this story. Like if you have land, how do you make it so that it's something that performs for you so that you can continue to do the great work that you're doing? And I think that's the essence of what Parkdale is trying to accomplish with the land trust, and the essence of what's happening in that community around, how do we make sure we continue to support the community? We love the community energy of Parkdale, and we think there's a huge opportunity to replicate that in all kinds of other communities, right? And in the GTA and beyond. So we've learned a lot with our work over the last year or so with Josh and the team at Parkdale. And I think we've got, we're getting to a model that we think we could replicate. But that was always the intention of us going into that experiment, right? To help them, number one, because we think it's a great organization, and their mission is great. And, we want to be there to support that. And they do all kinds of other things, as you know, Tonya, besides just housing, community garden, and space to collect together. And so it's just a great little organization. But we also think, there's other parts of the city in particular that have equal, sort of village feeling, right? Whether it's Kensington or Leslieville or whatever, out into northern Toronto. So how do we take that model and figure out how to do that other places? So that was the intention for us. You're on mute.
See, this was graceful, Zoya. She can step in when my internet goes. She's fantastic. So yeah, I could hear, you guys can hear me now. Okay, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the description. And I agree. I have to say we have a real gem in Parkdale right here with the really deeply democratic process of genuine resident engagement and really kind of articulating what they want. And correct me if I'm wrong here, or maybe you don't know, but I'm what was so interesting about the model in Parkdale, if I understood it right, was they basically said, we want to buy a house, right? And we want to retain that house, keep it out of the gentrification process, and we want to put it into community ownership. So they had a number of residents, and those residents were in rent geared to income kinds of programs. So you'd buy the house, then you'd look at what could, oh, Josh is here. The trust
here,
owns the land.
The trust
Excellent.
owns the land. Yeah.
Yeah. So we could get Josh to come on our next program. I'd love that, Josh.
Yeah, Josh is so great.
Yeah. That
Different
you have the trust owns the property. They then have the rent that comes in, and then there's this gap between what it can actually generate and what it needs to generate to pay its mortgage. And what I understood is that it was actually a section 37 partnership with the city that helped to bridge some of that gap. Do you know that?
I believe the first project that they did, that's true. I'm not 100% sure kind of on what happened there after that. I think that the not-for-profit need to find revenue is what you're describing, right? How are they being creative about doing that? I don't have the details on that, but yeah, I think there is a gap. There is a gap for sure. Yeah. And that's where I think philanthropy, investment dollars can be put to play. And that's kind of the part of the model that we created, was being able to find, investors who are interested in investing, looking at how do they participate in this whole thing. But the land is owned by the trust in perpetuity, like it never leaves. And the model is not a home ownership model. The model is keep people in their homes. Right.
In the rental. Yeah. And I think this is what's really exciting to me. And Josh, with all the so much respect for what Park is doing, I would love to have you on this program to give us the details. But from your perspective, and what's exciting about VCIB's role for me, Jayan, is that you're the financial partner that is willing to look at that and try to brainstorm and be creative around that gap. Because let's face it, when you get a loan or a mortgage or financing of any kind, you then have to pay it back. Yeah. And that payback is sometimes you actually only have X number of dollars and you need to figure out the other. And what's interesting is the hybridization of the space as we embrace community wealth. We start looking at the range of different revenue streams and the different tools that we have available. And certainly in CSI's case, the loan guarantee that the city of Toronto gave us was so
huge. Yeah.
To that first thing.
And I do think that I think where we want to be able to do more is in that sort of capital stack. So how do we access patient capital? Where does equity come into play? How does a bank look at it? Because we're still a regulated financial institution. We still have to, do all the right things from credit scoring and risk reviews and, monitoring the loan and all that kind of stuff we still have to do. But I think there's opportunity, and we announced a partnership with CMHC, a little while ago. I think there's opportunity to think about that in new and innovative ways, to your point, right? To have optionality for different types of organizations. And so
what would a CMHC be able to do in that stack if somebody's thinking about buying a building for community purposes now? And I'm just thinking about
so they do a portion of the financing of that, right? If that's part of the program, that there's 4 or 5 different programs that you can apply to CMHC for. So depending on what it is, they've come in, they've got a fund, they've come in and sort of funded some things for different players. Their whole mission is to have everybody live in an affordable dwelling, and so they're working on how to kind of make sure that the capital that they have access to can be amplified with partners like us. So it could be a backstop, it could be a guarantee, it could be part of the loan is CMHC based, and part of the loan is a financial institution based. There's 5 or 6 different models to look at.
I love it, and I've drilled you on affordable housing, and I think it's such an important challenge for us here in Toronto. We're really up against some very big, the prices, even a global pandemic, seem to continue to rise. And looking at that range of tools is so critical, but that is just one of our crises. We also have a maybe even larger one in the form of climate change. And I'd love to hear more about your work in clean energy, what the partnership with CoPower is, what it means, and how it works.
Yeah, so we acquired CoPower in 2019.
Former CSI member. Okay, keep on.
Yeah, and so they were a group of people who really were passionate about two things. One, democratizing impact investing. So the idea that if you were a retail investor, you could buy into the idea of your money going directly to support financing clean energy projects. So it was a bond, and then a team that understood how to go out there and work with different organizations to do the project financing side of it. So we've been integrating them over the course of the last year, and the team is now one. So everybody's a VCIB employee technically, but we've kept the vessel of CoPower as a different entity because we needed to do that for lots of reasons. And so we do have a team now who's getting quite adept at being able to finance clean energy projects. So that could be anything from a building that needs a retrofit, could be a solar farm, a wind farm, something that's transitioning out of oil and gas or extraction and into something more sustainable in the future. So that whole sort of spectrum, starting to have great conversations around conservation financing and financing for agriculture, which is, agriculture, commercial buildings, two of the biggest sort of contributors to, some of the climate issues that we're facing. And so that's kind of still at the commercial level. And then Vancity has come out with a position around net zero, by 2040, right? So really trying to be aggressive in terms of looking at their book of assets, the loans that they have, and making sure that it's bringing down the carbon versus increasing the carbon. So more to come, I think, from us in terms of what does that mean, because I think we will be pushing and helping to push, anybody even building an affordable project, also be including that clean energy component, that environmental sustainability component, which the math on that, the stories that you hear is it's so much more expensive to put it in. Yes, but the efficiency that you get out of the other side, just from a profit, revenue perspective, is significantly improved. So trying to really, find that sweet spot, because we think that that's the change that needs to occur. And there's a lot of activity going on in that space, for sure.
You're calling out something really important, which is, for years I've been thinking we keep having social over here and environmental or climate over here, and we can't do that anymore, right? We have to, every project, this is one of the things I've been pushing my friends at CMHC to think, like, you shouldn't finance anything that doesn't have a green
standard. That's right.
Standard, or even regenerative. Like, let's push it. Like, what about biomimicry? How do we actually have these buildings creating energy? Reducing
I agree.
The load. And how do we start getting those riskier ventures financed? And I guess, that's where you guys are in that space. And I'm interested. So if an entrepreneur has a green project that they need financing for, do they call CoPower up? Or
some of them do, yeah, for sure. And more, as we're out doing things like this and we had our own webinar series this year, and our first one last year was around energy as a service, right? So how do you look at that as a builder and a developer and a building owner, commercial property owner? So for sure, we're there to help both, those that need a project. So we understand how to do project financing around the construction of something, right? Or the installation of something. So that's a space that we know how to do really well. We have the banking products available for environmental organizations who have a business, whether it's a consulting business or a service business or a manufacturing business. We have the tools to be able to help in that space today. We wouldn't have had those tools, 6 months ago. So we've got the tools to kind of help in environmental anything, right? Really, in terms of growing your business, solving the problems, whatever it is. So anything from kind of 500,000 up to, some of our projects are north of 20 million, where we bring in Vancity to help finance some of that.
Nice.
So that's kind of our sweet space, which is which is our sweet spot on affordability is kind of in that same zone, because there aren't a lot, to your point, if there are other financial institutions who do it, but the way we do it is different. So back to your opening comment about being a partner, like, we really want to know about you. We want to be part of your success. We want to profile you. We don't want to profile us. We want to, bring other partners that we've developed in our network to the table to help solve the problems that you're trying to solve. So we've got the luxury, I guess, of being small enough and purpose-led that we think that's the way of the future, versus you having to go into a branch and one day it's me and the next day it's somebody else and nobody understands your story and you don't get the continuity. So we think that's we're learning that that's one of our sweet spots. So you'll see more around partnership.
I love it, and I'm your poster child and favorite fan. So it's been phenomenal to feel the comfort, especially during this pandemic. To feel like your bank isn't going to call you with like foreclosure. We're doing fine, guys. We're fine. We're good. Yeah. At the moment there at the beginning, we're like, holy mackerel, what does this mean? So, okay, last question, and then we're going to sort of open it up to other folks. Actually, no, two. I got one. So green bonds. I never really fully understood a green bond. Can you just explain that to me? Because I'm kind of dumb that way.
So a bond is a an investment product, right? So you can't buy it through your bank, or you have to go look for it in the investment management space. Right. And so it's simply a way of bringing in money and a promise to an investor of a return. So, but it's stable. So it's like, it's a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 5 year GIC equivalent of, invest your money, here's your return. And then the idea is that money is used to put the capital into being able to complete the project.
So good. Our staff team 2 days ago just started in our Slack channel. It's investment season. Does anybody else know how to do this? And it's been really interesting. In 16 years and in my whole career, I've never seen a group of people get together to go, okay, well, how do we want to invest, and what is this thing called a TFSA and RRSP, and how do all these things work? And so I think what's exciting is that right now the moment has come,
Isn't it great?
It's so good. We're winning, Jayan. We're winning.
Really, right? It's like, right? It's like the moment has come. I totally agree with you.
It's like, it's so exciting. And I mean, of course, it's also this sort of like, wasn't enough, not fast enough. It's like, okay, I know, but you know how hard change is? Holy mackerel. So my question is, what gives you cause for even greater optimism? Like what do you look at that you go, that is where we need to go next?
I think that we've learned a lot around technology, right? And how do we use technology for good? So I think the intersection between community, technology, relationships, and a clean future, I think the time has come. So I think we're going to see a whole bunch of, I'm really excited, like the 15-minute city idea. I'm really excited about some of the work that you and like Maz is doing over at TAS, and Dream is starting to talk about, and these players in Ontario starting to look at building and renovating areas of the city that have a lot more community purpose-led pieces to it, right? So doing it, the intersection, as you say, of all of those things, and building communities that have resiliency around, different socioeconomic groups coming together and solving the problems that make it more equal. Like, I think the movement is there. I really don't think we're going to go back to, pre-March the 13th of 2020. Like, I think that I hope all that stuff has changed for good. I think we've all recognized that, gratitude and reaching out and sharing and being authentic has become even more important in this new world. And so I'm very hopeful. And then I follow the stats around what do consumers think, what do employees think. And, the numbers are pretty staggering. Like it's like 75 to 80% of the Canadian population, as we went into the pandemic, said things like, I'm going to stay loyal to those organizations that stay loyal to me. And I'm going to make sure my money's going to buy the things in those organizations. Like that's a significant population. Yeah. I think employees are saying the same thing. I'm going to be loyal to the organizations that treat me well, didn't lay me off, or if they did, they had a way of bringing me back or supporting me, like the organizations that did the right thing. And I think those two kind of consumer and employee behavior. And then you have a son the same age as my kids, like they're just going to change their world. I think we did a great job on raising that generation, and they are not going to tolerate they're not going to tolerate racism. They're not going to tolerate gender inequality. They're not going to tolerate not dealing with climate change. So, they're forcing, there's such a huge cohort, and they're forcing the world to do what we have been talking to them about as we started with them when they were young and told them, they couldn't be in school bullying people. They needed to be accepting of other cultures. We got them recycling, like all that stuff that happened as we were learning about how important all this stuff was. And to your point, the pace wasn't there. Now the pace is there. That's what I think, that's the thing that I have the most hope in, is this thing has caused us all to share. We've all shared something, universally across the world, and it's propelling us to be different.
And we showed that we can respond at a global level, which means
absolutely
that we can respond to anything globally, should we actually be properly motivated. So,
and one of the things I've said all along is like, I think that you and I know each other. And so we already had a trusting relationship before we all, we went into this. But I think the authenticity in this new virtual world is so refreshing. Like, I love it when kids show up and dogs show up and cats show up, and the plumber, is running behind the person. I had this one session that I did where the guy was doing it from his bathroom, and he had I had the virtual screen on behind, but he had no other privacy in his house, right beside his bathroom. Like, I think that's all just brilliant. And I just hope we keep our uniforms off, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And keep the human side of progress going. Yeah.
You're speaking my language, sister. It's like it's the good stuff, right? It's the belonging. Yeah. It's the sense of relationship. It's the social capital, which is so critical. Okay, but listen, you and I could talk forever, but we've got so many good questions. So I'm going to ask a couple of them, Zoya, and then you can chime in. One of them, Shauna asked this question about, when we're doing investment, risk always comes up with these untraditional projects. What are some of the ways that we in the not-for-profit sector can reduce the risk?
I think, we always have to look at credit risk, right? And so credit is really around character. It's around, do you have the cash flow and the revenue to support it? Do you have, operations that can handle it? So I think, just being really clear on all of that stuff continually, right? We can look at creative sources of revenue. We've done it with, you will know this, Tonya, we've done it with CSI and others. So we'd be happy to talk about that. And I think, my experience on default, which is always what, regulators and banks are worried about, right? Even look at the pandemic, look at RBC and CIBC and Scotiabank, who just announced, they're reducing their loan loss allowances because things haven't been that bad. So we always overcorrect. I think having, that sort of oversight of a board, a really strong not-for-profit board with a strong, executive director, CEO like Tonya, you're going to get what you need. I think that's a key component of how you manage the risk. But default rates in not-for-profits, our experience has been, it's very low. I think you have the same, when I talk to my contacts in the Indigenous communities, nobody's defaulting on their loan. So I think there's this whole myth around risk that I think we can only curb by the practical things that we are doing to demonstrate that our portfolio isn't any riskier. So, last year would have been a great example. A few of our clients, like Tonya, have faced a fundamental challenge to their business model. people can't gather anymore, but they've been able to come through it and find a new way of doing it. So I think, it's that ingenuity and innovation and keeping the relationships going with your bankers. I think is really important.
Awesome. And I wonder about community engagement, and if you go and you look at something like Parkdale and you see the number of people who are supportive of this vision at such a deep rooted way, how does that influence your thinking in terms of your investment strategies?
Yeah, I think it, for sure influences our belief around what the organization is trying to do. Because I think what I've seen in not-for-profit social enterprises that have been successful, the resiliency factor is really, really high. So Tonya, how to pick up the phone and start phoning the people in your network if you're going to get in trouble. And I think that's the key, right?
Yep. Oh, don't even think about it.
But you know what? The irony is it's no different than an entrepreneur.
No.
Really.
Yeah.
It's not, right? Mm-hmm.
Zoya, give us some good questions. I think we got less time than we had hoped. Sorry, it's my fault because I'm enjoying the conversation so much.
That's okay.
Conversation, and during your interview, lots of those questions were answered that came up in the Q&A. There was a question around for community land trusts, the benefits of having it being owned by that community compared to by the city or others.
Well, then the community has control, right? So think about it, right? You don't have to go through any sort of government processes, permitting. Like it's the community-owned land, so the community can decide what they want to do with that land, right? So I think the control of the land is now it's not a government-owned asset. It's a collective asset. It's no different than I own my house, except now it's a group of us that own it, right? So
great, thank you. And there's a question as well around why aren't more banks making similar community investments to VCIB? What are the barriers?
Well, I think they want to. I think if you look at if you went and looked at RBC's website, they say a lot of the same things, right? But they're not designed for it. Like we've been fortunate to be able to design this for this purpose, right? So like we've talked about transitioning economies, the transition needs to happen within each of the industries there. So I think the desire is there, and I think they do a lot of great work. Like I cannot, they have more money than we'll ever have, and they do a ton of great work in the community, sponsorships and supporting things. But they're structured in a way that's sort of very deep and efficient. So that makes creativity is just more difficult for them to do. But ultimately, when I look back on my, what did I do to change the world in these years that I was here? I hope by the time I leave, that competition is so fierce because everybody's doing what we're doing.
That's right. We want to plan ourselves. We planned obsolescence.
Right. Exactly.
If we're doing our job, they won't need us anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'll just say there's a couple of questions in here from our things. One of them is raising the question around the property values of homes. And I just want to say that we have recently done a very exciting social innovation lab on the financialization of housing. So watch for that. We'll present, we'll have some experts come in and talk about it. It's a very complex topic, but really interesting. So we'll get back to
that. Sounds like a good panel conversation.
Yeah. We're doing a partnership with CMHC on this, and it's quite phenomenal. And just to sort of fast track a couple of other things, Selma is asking about, do we have the construction as green passive construction to keep up with the demand for housing? In other words, like, is there enough people willing to do this? And I think what's going to be really interesting, and love your thoughts, is, green jobs, man. Like, how do we get green social jobs into these projects? Thoughts?
So I just joined the Toronto Board of Trade. They've set up a committee on affordable housing. This is some of the things that we're talking about, right? Is how do you start to change, where can we influence policy around passive homes and laneway homes and other forms of housing than just the traditional, condo complex or single family home. So more to come, but I think it's on people's radar across the network. I think there's some exciting, private sector developers starting to think about this in a more strategic way, which is awesome.
Zoe, what do you got?
Yeah, I think we actually need to start wrapping since we're just about at 1. But I wanted to say thank you so much, Jan, for your time, and Tonya for your always thoughtful questions. And to everyone listening, thank you for those great comments and ideas and questions that popped up in the chat. We will follow up with the recording for this session so you can revisit it and share it with your friends and have lots of great discussions. And we'll also follow up with a bit more information about VCIB, including their impact report, which outlines a lot more detail about the many awesome projects that they funded over the last year. So
yeah, the team's been amazing. Thank you, Zoya. Yeah.
Great. And Tonya, anything else?
Yeah, I'll just say, watch for our next economy conversation. We're going to have Peter Dietz talk to us about how he is transitioning to an ESOP, an employee shared ownership company. So
awesome.
Super interesting movement also emerging around.
I love it.
Right? So good. So building on Bill Young's earlier conversation, which we opened the next economy conversations, this will be a very practical, hands-on how he did it. So I'm super excited about that. But Jayan, thank you. Thank you for joining us for today. Thank you for inspiring us. Thank you for showing the way. Thank you for the cost that it takes to be a leader, to lead organizations through this time of change, and for staying true to your values. In history, man, it's this kind of leadership, woman, that we're going to look back and go, this is what marked the change. So thank you. Thank you so much.
It's very nice to spend the time with you. Yeah, thanks, Zoya.
Yeah.
Thanks. Bye, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.